I think I'd love to get started.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Today, it's a great joy to be with you. And it's our pleasure to welcome Melinda Bullen today to be with us for our topic this week. This week and next week. We have another guest next week, but beyond boundaries. And Melinda's going to invite us into a conversation that is so desperately needed in our community. Not so much Trinity's community, I don't think, but nevertheless, it won't hurt. And maybe more than I know. And then also our Asheville community, our state community, our national community, our world community that we are all a part of. So, Melinda, thank you so much.
So to be here in such a flip from my normal experience here at Trinity, not from my real life. Outside of Trinity, I do this sort of thing a bit, but so nice to be in front of you all, this particular audience especially. So we're going to talk about the courage to connect or beyond boundaries. Full disclosure, this was actually supposed to be a series of courses that were going to happen pre-Helene. And as you know, everything sort of shifted after Helene. So we've scrunched it down. I'm going to do this Sunday. And then next week, you're going to meet Todd Lester. He may pop in this morning as well, and if so, I'll introduce him. But Todd will be leading the conversation next week, and he particularly is going to be using some materials from Braver Angels. If you're familiar, with Braver Angels, it's a national nonprofit group that really works on bringing both sides of the aisle together for thoughtful conversation, political conversation. So you all won't be engaging in that particularly, but you'll be talking about sort of the internal work needed to engage in those conversations so that they're productive. So he's going to be leading conversation next week. But I want to talk a little bit about why we are here. You've read our bios. I'm not going to go into all of who I am. It's in the program that you saw in the last couple of weeks and online. But I want to talk a little bit about why Todd and I were so motivated to accept the invitation by Amy and Scott to come in and have these conversations. And the truth is, you know, Todd and I in our work, separate work, are really big believers in engaging in tough conversations, right? And finding pathways forward in those. We believe we really are better together than apart. That is true as well. And that we can disagree with each other, but with the right tools and intention, you need to want to have conversations with people that think differently from you. We can actually create conversations and connections that are compassionate and respectful and really help us move forward in progress. So in these 2 Sundays, today and next week, in our time together, we're actually going to be leveraging skills and finding tools that are actually less about convincing other people to think the way we do, right? And more about connecting across difference. Because that is, in fact, where we are in the world today. We're definitely around people who may think differently from us. So a little about me, a couple of things. You see stuff on the table. Yes, we're going to be doing some activities today. You're not just going to be listening to me, I promise. You're going to be talking to each other mostly. You are going to be in pairs. So if you find yourself needing to find a partner, there'll be a moment where you can find another person. But let me go ahead and share a little bit about me and some context. So I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. I was born into it because both of my grandfathers, believe it or not, were Episcopal priests, which is sort of wild. So it's truly a part of my family story. I've been a member of Trinity for about 1.5 years. And I chose Trinity, and this is going to be really familiar to most of you, because of what I saw as the very proactive welcoming I received. I had lived in Asheville and attended a different congregation before. When I moved back, I was sort of Goldilocksing the Episcopal churches, right? Trying to find the right fit. And as I came to Trinity, I'm not kidding when I tell you I was greeted by a parishioner in the parking lot. Like, it was so proactive and genuine and authentic. It was so beautiful. And so there's no question I felt welcomed at Trinity, but I was really reflecting the last couple of weeks of when did I feel like I belonged at Trinity? Because that's a different question, right? And so in thinking about what's helped me feel like I belong there, there are a few things that came up for me. the first thing that came up for me was when I started learning the stories of Trinity's history with community service, because that's a high value issue for me. And so those stories were really impactful. And then it's when I started to learn the stories of other parishioners, right? And I started to feel, oh yeah, that's me too. Oh, that's my story. Oh yeah, we get each other, right? So I was hearing those stories. And then of course, it's when I started to feel my own family story showing up at Trinity, right? So it was sort of these collection of stories. Once I knew this place and its people shared story with me, I felt a sense of belonging. And that's what we're gonna explore today. The good news is the tool we're gonna talk about in terms of having courage to connect is about story, right? When we use story as a tool, how do we create deeper connections, even when we're living in a world with big divides? So, I want to take a moment and welcome our Zoom folks. I know we have a couple people joining us online. For our Zoom friends, I want to let you know that both activities are in the chat. So while we won't put you in a breakout room, I'll ask you to do some reflections on the questions that are being asked. But for the folks in the room, you get to talk to each other. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start with a story, right? We can't spend an hour talking about story and start with a story. So in front of you, you all should have a prompt card, okay? And on that card are a series of prompts, just questions. What I want you to do is I want you to turn to a partner, and using one of those prompts, I want you to tell a story. You get to choose. Here's the thing. You only have 2 minutes to tell your story. Okay. So again, this is the card. Everyone should have one in front of them. These are from the Moth. If anybody's a fan of the Moth storytelling, these are the Moth cards. But on the back, you'll see a bunch of prompts. Pick one. Don't overthink it. Find the one that resonates and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally have a story about the grocery store. I'm going to tell that one because you only get 2 minutes. So each have 2 minutes to tell your story. I will be timing you because I'm tough that way. And then we're going to talk about it, okay? So find a partner, grab a card, and that first storyteller can give it a go. Yeah. That's it. The old school ordinance is like perfect again. The middle was, yeah, and you can choose Spanish. And you oh, so like. So those first storytellers only 1 more minute left. Then we switch. Thanks. It's great. Yeah.
And his grandmother. What is the That's it. Okay, I'm just with on the other in there. You think? It's me more. And so, it's I didn't. Yeah, it's a grandmother. Preacher. Just have. Yeah. And we have 1 minute. I'm going to get to 30 sleep. I'll do the next week. I did. Okay, you can wrap up the story on. Come back together as a bridge, right? Absolutely. Oh, definitely. Okay. Oh, no. Like now, everybody come back. Started. Right. Like what? Stopping stories is like stopping them. Right? And that's exactly what this is all about. I want to take a minute and I want to hear a little bit, because I certainly made some observations. I want to hear a little bit about what feelings came up, either as a storyteller or as the listener. What did you feel? What did you experience? Anybody?
We had a connection because we had a similar experience, and it happened to be same as yours, coming to Trinity.
Oh, nice. Well, it's funny, you all were somebody I was gonna point out, because what I noticed too, with the timing, with the pressure of the time, and you were so intently listening to her story. And when I broke in with time, you were like, no, keep going. There was like, I want you to keep going, a curiosity and an interest. Really beautiful. Yeah.
Scout, she told a story about hiking and backpacking. Really made me remember a lot of things that I enjoyed. I didn't have, like, I was letting her tell the story, so when I sent back the things that remind me of it. It was really fun.
Yeah, please.
We realized immediately that we had a pre-existing connection that we had never met.
Really? How many of y'all talked to somebody you came with or know well? How many of you were talking to somebody you know well? And then of those people, keep your hand raised. Did you learn something new about that person? Oh, yay. Lovely. All right. And then, of course, we have some new connections happening as well, which is beautiful. All right. Well, there's going to be more storytelling. Don't worry. But I really want to talk a little bit about why stories have power and how we can use them to create connection when we're dealing with difference, right? So I think we can likely all agree, stories have been used throughout human history in a myriad of ways, right? Before spoken language, you had things like cave paintings and other visual forms that would tell the stories of culture and history. Before reading and writing, before literacy, you had storytelling, bards, for example, passing down history and genealogy. And they were also talking about cultural practices, right? Just helping generation to generation understand where they came from. So the other thing to think about too is stories really helped explain the natural world to folks, right? And certainly it helped make sense of the unexplainable, that's for sure. We also know, oh, there we go. Sorry. Google versus PowerPoint. We also know that stories have a way of evoking feelings, creating beliefs, and supporting or breaking barriers. For example, for years I wound up working for a water utility in Portland, Oregon. And I remember when I started and new employees started in general, the story that was told to every new employee at this utility was, oh, we're so glad you're here, but look, it's gonna take like 3 years for you to get this organization or your job even. And I remember reflecting on that and watching myself and other new employees really struggle with that story, that narrative, right? It wasn't personal, but it also let me know, oh, I'm not gonna be allowed to take risks, right? I'm not gonna have credibility for 3 years. This organization might be a little messed up. It's gonna take me 3 years to understand my job, right? All these narratives that kept coming up for me that I was like, that's really interesting. So this story infused a belief in this organization, right? But we also might think of stories as entertainment. That's often what we think about stories, right? But they've been used to teach, they've been used to keep records, share values, create culture. And you know what? Stories are the language of faith, right? When we think about our faith. Stories shape us, literally, shape us. So for example, my dad thought it was very funny every birthday since I was born until he passed when I was about 47 to tell me the same story of the day of my birth every birthday. And his story was some version of, and it would come at any point in the day. You never knew what was going to happen. But at some point in the day, the story would be, the day you were born, I went to the nursery, I'm standing at the glass, I'm looking at the bassinets, and I'm scanning to look for baby Bullen, and all I see are these 2 huge feet sticking out of the bassinet. Right? My feet are very normal. I just want to know my feet are fine. But he thought this was hilarious. And every year I would get some version of the big feet story. The press were there, or Guinness Book of World Records was there. There's always some new fact about it, right? And although it's a silly story and not true, again, I have normal feet, it created a real bond with my dad. It cultivated my humor, right? And again, it helped me get a sense of self, a sense of family. So again, stories shape us. But stories are not just about culture and interpersonal relationships, history. Stories actually have a physiological connection. Storytellers and listeners are physiologically connected. Now, I want to be super clear, I'm not a neurologist. I just want to be really clear about that. But this is some new information that I've been learning about with storytelling that I think is absolutely fascinating. First and foremost, it turns out that functional MRIs being done on listeners and storytellers are showing that different areas of the brain light up when someone is listening to a story, and not just the networks involved in language processing, but other neural circuits too. And as you hear a story unfold, your brain waves actually start to synchronize with those of the storyteller. Yuri Hassan, he's a psychologist and a neurologist out of Princeton. He's been doing research on this for years. And what he's found, and his research team have found, is when they were looking at 2 people, one is the storyteller and one is the listener, when the listener is getting the greatest comprehension of the story and getting emotionally involved in the story, their brain waves begin to synchronize with the storyteller. Also, stories activate parts of our brain, the part called theory of the mind regions. They activate those areas associated with understanding thoughts, feelings, intentions. They help us empathize and see situations from different perspectives. And lastly, stories, turns out, release a ton of chemicals in our brain. They actually release dopamine, oxytocin, and cortisol. So there's a physiological connection when we talk about story. So how is story a tool, right? Well, we know that when you're thinking about stories, it's certainly more interesting than just dry data, right? So it helps us retain and remember things. Stories also help us connect with others on an emotional level, fostering empathy and understanding. Stories help us learn about different cultures, beliefs, and values. So in other words, it strengthens our social bonds. I think we saw a little bit of that this morning already. Stories can transport us into another person's world. So just beyond empathy, we can actually place ourselves in those experiences. So in other words, we're seeing the world through a completely different perspective than we would otherwise. And of course, stories have the power to even shift our beliefs. If we're shifting perspective, if we have empathy, if we're learning something new, it can really enlighten us in a way that we never saw coming. So it's hard to argue that story is impactful, historical, influential, fun, but how do we actively use it to create connection, especially when there's difference or conflict? I'm going to argue that there are two critical ingredients necessary: curiosity and vulnerability. Now, I know seems super simple and everybody uses those words, but I want you to really think about the last time you were in conflict with someone, or you were in a conversation with somebody that you had a very different opinion with. I know for myself, and I have to work very hard, I am not showing up curious. I am not showing up excited with opening myself up and being vulnerable. I'm not necessarily asking questions, right? When we're frustrated, when we're stressed, when we're in conflict, we tend to stop being curious, shut down, close off. But if we're actively trying to connect to a person, and again, that's such a key piece here, we have to want to do this. We have to be willing to wonder more, right? Wonder why they sit in the position they sit in, wonder what influences them, wonder what interests them. And then we have to be willing to give, right? This is where vulnerability comes in. We can't just ask all of the questions. That's an easy place to sit. I'll just ask questions. Nope, you actually have to make an offering of your own. You have to be able to share your experiences, your foibles, your ideas, and just the softer parts of ourselves to the conversation. So we're going to play with that vulnerability and tell another story. This story is in the form of what's called the I Am poem. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask anyone to be a poet today. This poem is a very famous poem. You'll find the template at the center of your table along with pens. Essentially what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to give you about 7-8 minutes to fill it in. If you all remember Mad Libs, this is essentially the same thing. You are filling in the blank with whatever the prompt is, be it an adjective, a memory, a detail of some sort. Essentially, this is going to become a story about your past and your history. If you look on the back, there's an example of what this looks like. You see the original poem, and then to the right, you see the model poem, which I'll read through really quickly so you can get a sense of it. The model poem, and you're going to be creating one of these with your own story, is called Where I'm From. I am from bookshelves, from vinegar and green detergent. I'm from the dog hair in every corner, yellow, abundant, the vacuum could never get it all. I'm from azaleas, the magnolia tree whose leaves crunched under my feet like snow every fall. I'm from puzzles and sunburns, from Dorothy Ann and Mary Christine Catherine. I'm from reading and road trips, from Please Watch Your Brother and Don't Let Your Brother Hit You. I'm from Easter sunrises and Iowa churches at Christmas. I'm from Alexandria and the Rileys, Sturzing's potato chips and sponge candy. From my Air Force dad's refusal to go to Vietnam, from my mom's leaving home at 17. On a low shelf in my new house is a stack of photo albums, carefully curated by my faraway father, chronicling my childhood, and from these pages, yellowed but firm, holding on to me across the country. You're going to be doing the same thing by filling in your own memories and your own details. Good news, no pressure to be a poem. Or poet, these are all already inside of you. So I'm going to give you some time to just work on that, and then we'll come back together as a group. For our online folks, you can find the template in the chat. Take a few more minutes. Okay, 2 more minutes. One moment. Okay. A few people still writing, certainly me. We have some folks that have finished. And I would love for new brave soul to be willing to share their poem. Who might be interested? I see some encouragement in the gallery. Yes, please.
I am from paintings and music, from nice cars and parties. I am from the rocks and trees, solid, different, strengthening. I am from roses and plums, fragrant and stinky. I'm from family dinners and arguments, from Mimi and Bud, from the patience and perfection, from good stock and comfortable. I'm from weekly worship and commitment, from Chicago in the South, from grits and roasted meats, from the grandmother who saved the family liquor for medicinal purposes, the father who nearly killed another because he had been told he was little. Pictures that are in a drawer that's hard to open, telling me who I am.
That's beautiful. Who else can share?
Grease on my and my daddy's hands, from Gojo, Pepsi Cola. I am from the rambling brick home on Carolina Avenue, on a street with friends I love, with my own special room, screened in board and fireplace. I'm from oak trees, the smell bursting from splitting the wood. I'm from Christmas get-together, two types of grandfathers, from Daddy and Mama. I'm from the passive and the aggressive, from don't say anything that is not good about another, to and dry up, boys don't cry. I am from sentimental hymns I love, walking the aisle for salvation. I am from Shelby because the hospital was better according to my nurse mama. Homemade ice cream, tomato sandwiches. From the I got grounded for skipping school by my daddy for the Thanksgiving weekend. To the tender love to my mama every day. Her life with me. My picture of family in my pool. Oh yeah, my picture of my family in my pool room now. The wind up clock from my parents' home.
And so different, right? Another. They're brave souls. They all are so shy. You see how beautiful they're turning out. I have no doubt. Thank you. Yes, I can't wait to hear it. I got a couple. Good. Let's start here. No. Let's start here and then we'll go to the third. I have room for two more. So perfect.
I am smart. So I feel this is perfect candy. Gradually tasted sweet and sour. I am daisies. She loves me now. I'm from church and beauty, Louise and Tom. I'm from the steadfast and discipline. I'm too emotional and too smart. I'm from Cradle Church and secrets galore. I'm from Milwaukee and British. Rare steak, artichokes with hollandaise. Sisters, Renee, Rebecca, who lived unmarried in the Summit Avenue family home in St. Paul in the 1920s, doing grand things in grand ways.
I'm loving as we hear some of the poems too of like the noddings and the chuckling, like, again, there is recognition, which is beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
I'm from waves and sand on the beach. From Jergens cherry hand lotion and Duncan Hines brownies. I'm from the house by the creek with the babbling brook, a daffodil blooming. Smoke coming from the chimney, gardenias paper white. I am from yellow tulips with red middles and black stamens. I'm from going to church on Christmas Eve, taking photos. I'm from Ken, my daddy, and Charlotte, my mother. From being honest and seeking the truth. From don't take pencils from work. Bring your own. Always be kind, the Episcopal Church and the child of God. From Savannah, Georgia. From pork chops, mashed potatoes, and sauerkraut because I'm German. I'm from the town of Belleville, where my family owned a foundry that made stoves, where my grandfather Herman started out carrying beer and married a boss's daughter.
That's wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. I know that can feel really vulnerable. I promised I was going to take you to a vulnerable place. But thank you so much for those that shared. But thank all of you for diving in and willing to sort of go into yourself and pull out these memories to create this story. What was unexpected or surprising in that writing? What came up that you wouldn't have seen coming?
I think for me, it
Yeah.
was how quickly I felt a surge of emotions on some of the things I was seeking to fill in that blank quickly.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Paradoxical. Yeah, there were so many sides to what.
Sort of the opposite of yours, the fact that this scared me. Just to let it all hang out kind of thing. It's not my way.
Yeah, I appreciate that, really. Yeah.
I think I struggled with some because I don't think I had a family that created a lot of these things. Being the last, being unexpected. I don't know what to say about ancestry. I don't know anything about family tendency. I mean, those things were really hard for me to come up with something.
Oh, that's really insightful too. I hadn't thought about that. Being asked to pull from the past, but what if?
It really wasn't I mean, I looked at specific family stories, and maybe it's my current family and not my past family. You know, because they're two families.
Sure.
When you grow up and then create and when you come from. And it was hard my parents weren't that were, talked a lot. I mean, they were tired, they were old, it was time. It was unexpected, here's some time, things, right.
Yeah, but it brings up a really interesting question, not for us to answer today, but just for all of us to go in this idea of identity and and how we decide what stories we decide to tell about that, right?
I figure out what the family needs is already like was say about us.
What do they all say?
Yeah, being someone who's adopted, it's really, every do these kinds of things is really tough, and then be adopted and not having a child. So, you know, I really had to kind of get in there and pull, I mean, I've had a great adulthood, so. But, yes, so I relate to both of these beautiful ladies right here, because, you know, I know deep inside, but do I really want to bring it out? You know, although I will say I'm from New York City and I like zoning, so.
Right. I so appreciate that. I think one, it's just important to remember in these moments the different experiences that show up in the room. What resonates for some, won't for others, and can bring up our feelings, but also I go back to like the stories that are true, the stories we choose, stories that, yeah, we want to carry forward that help live us better. And that's lovely. I guess my last question before I close this out is, did anything evoke a feeling of connection for you, either in writing in your template or in hearing other people's poems? Did you feel any sense of connection? And if so, what did you feel?
I felt a real sense of connection to how different the journey of growing up in the 50s. Lots of us were even in the 50s, so I would do that in terms of the tip of the iceberg way that we grew up in the 50s. Just it's so different, and our kids were every race, and for their kids, and the feel today and from whoa, and just so I felt comforted.
A recognition that I feel seen.
This is not an answer to the question. I'm gonna take a shot of getting children to fill this out. That's true. You know,
See what they have to say. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you have their extra on the tables too. We're going to take them for sure.
Seems like a good thing to do with the family.
Yeah.
With your siblings.
I know, right? Oh, disclosure, it's trying to do that. And both my siblings are adopted. And they were biological parents. And my brother would be like, I am not doing any of Linda, all this soft business you do, I don't want anything to do with that, right? So I've tried it, and but I do think it's fascinating. It's vulnerability, you're right, it is hard, and we need to give people space to like come into it where they will. But I love the idea of the varying narratives in one family. Right? It's amazing. My brother's 8 years older than me. Let me tell you, we have very different perspectives on our childhoods. Yeah.
Terry and I had to share because there was only
Oh, no.
one paper.
Okay.
But anyway, no, it worked out great because we both had strict mothers. We both were gotten on to for our behavior. And we both like steak, so.
So you legitimately found connection. We're like, we can co-create this poem. It's amazing. Thank you so much. And thanks for being creative. Yeah.
To piggyback on what my lovely wife Alyssa said, we're both in our families have siblings that are all 9 years apart, 18 years apart. She's got one that's 25 years apart. But and to your point about growing up in the 50s, I mean, it does harken back with me and our two families. There was a lot of complexity. And maybe I should spend more time, as I heard Peter reflect on, sort of the organic things that are not human beings, you know. I mean, yes, they're human beings, but.
Well, I have no doubt that this is going to create a lot more conversation on the drive home. And I'm excited to hear more about it. But I do want to make sure y'all get upstairs in time. So let me go ahead and wrap this up, which bugs me a little bit because I want to hear more stories. But I do want to talk a little bit about what we're taking out of the room, right? Because I never like getting in front of people without some sort of action, some sort of thing that you can literally go into the week with and actually practice. So, and I'm also a big believer in low stakes to high stakes. So I'm going to give you super low stakes and we'll move up to the higher stakes. So The first thing is the super low stakes option, which is, you know, just doing some reflection this week. I'd love for you to be thinking about the stories that you have. We all have our own Rolodex of personal stories. And so I'd love for you to be thinking about what stories have you noticed that you tell about yourself that help people feel connected to you? We all have those stories where people laugh or there's recognition. So maybe think about those. Next, I would love for you to imagine a conversation with somebody that you know in your life that thinks very differently from you. Probably somebody that when you think about them, maybe it gives you a little anxiety, a little bit of the sweats, you're like, oh boy. And notice what's coming up in your body about that idea of conversation, right? And so as you're noticing those feelings, start trying to practice the curiosity. Okay, I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious. I definitely don't think I want to have this conversation, but I wonder, right? I'm curious about this. These are the questions I might ask this person. How might I try to connect maybe some of my personal stories to what I know is going to be a tense thing? That's sort of a mid stakes. And then the higher stakes, maybe have the conversation, right? So the idea of I've practiced, I've thought it through, and you know what? I really am coming at love in this conversation. I want to talk to this person. I want to feel that connection. I'm going to try it. I'm going to practice it. The reality is it is about the practicing. You know, it's always going to be hard, but the more we do it, the easier it does become. A couple logistics. One, if you want to connect with me or have questions, or send me your poem because it's amazing. There's my contact information. A couple things, pens and moth cards, please leave on the table because they belong to me, but the template you can take with you. I would also ask you to consider taking your poem home and maybe sharing it with people that you cited in the poem, right? You don't have to, it's not a requirement, but I hope that you might consider doing that. I also want you to consider the stories you heard today, not just the stories you heard in your pairings and the stories you heard across the room. You know, I told you a few different stories today. I told you about the Portland Water Bureau, and I told you about my dad and his future, and, you know, talked about my history with Trinity and the Episcopal faith. Ideally, which is the whole point, we all feel a stronger connection to each other. Maybe you feel a stronger connection to me, a connection that was stronger leaving the room than when you came into it, which was the goal, because stories do connect us. And as a reminder, next Sunday will be Todd Lester from Braver Angels, and he'll be doing a facilitated workshop during this hour called Depolarizing the Self. And it's where we're working on that inner stuff so that we can be in conversation with folks that might see the world differently than we do. And it's going to be fantastic. So I encourage you to come. Thank you.
Thank you.